Provi adesso?
Ok, perfetto.
Perfetto.
Beh, direi che possiamo cominciare. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Welcome to the second webinars of this series on a very timely issue, screens and our relationship with screens and us. As you probably notice, I choose to have in the background this meme portraying Bernie Sanders in one of the many digital encounters that are roaming the web today on a global scale. Here is together with Bruce Springsteen. Such a meme wouldn't exist with the current digital mediascape. So I think it's really timely that our guest this afternoon is Professor Mauro Carbone. And I'm very pleased to introduce him to you. Mauro Carbone is Italian, is a philosopher. Since 2009, he has been full professor of philosophy at the University Jean Moulin Lyon 3 in Lyon, France, and is also a senior member of the Institut Universitaire de France. He mainly deals with phenomenology and contemporary aesthetics. He is one of the leading specialists in Maurice Merleau-Ponty thought and a protagonist of the current debate on visual culture, which is one of the topics of this series of webinars. Among the many things he accomplished, Mauro is the founder and co-director from the very beginning of the international journal Chiasmi International, which is a trilingual journal devoted to the thought of Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He has been a visiting professor in many universities. Among the many fellowships he had, the Italian Academy of Advanced Studies at Columbia University in New York in 2005, the New School for Social Research in New York on 2007, the Beijing University Beida in 2009, the Chinese University of Hong Kong in 2010, and last but not least, at the University of Parma, here where I'm talking from, in 2018. And among his many books, one of the most recent, very related to the topic he will discuss with us today, Philosophy Screens from Cinema to the Digital Revolution. So I'm very happy and delighted to give the digital floor to you, Mauro, please.
Thank you, Vittorio. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Let me thank my friend Vittorio Gallese for this invitation, and the University of Parma is an invitation which really honors me. And let me thank also Graziano Lingua and Marta Negeris, with which I could discuss some parts of my presentation. So let me share my screen. You know that the title of my presentation is Pandemic Effects, Philosophy Screens Face to the New Screen New Deal. First of all, let me explain the terms, some of the terms of this title, As Vittorio already mentioned, I published this book whose title sounds in English, Philosophy Screens from Cinema to the Digital Revolution, in Italian and in France in 2016, and in the United States in English in 2019. So when I speak of philosophy screen, I mean something very, very precise. That is to say, being the digital revolution. Can you see in a clear way my screen?
Yeah, you should
Yes.
click on the icon on the bottom right of PowerPoint to have the whole screen.
No, I prefer to have.
Okay.
Yes, so because this way I know what follows.
Okay, we can see.
Okay, great. So as I said, what I assumed in that book is that being the digital revolution, an event which changes things so fundamentally that there is absolutely no going back, as Mark Prensky wrote in his article titled Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants in 2001. And making the digital revolution live us more and more among and through electronic and digital screens, we need to question our related experiences in the effort to make a philosophy at today's scale. And this is what I call philosophy screens, meaning not a mere philosophy of screens, but a new sort of philosophy to be shaped precisely among and through screens, and this way mutating its own traditional identity. A new philosophy growing according to the screens. On the other hand, you know that in the title of my presentation, you find the expression Screen New Deal. I took this expression from an article of the Canadian-American journalist and activist Naomi Klein, published on The Guardian at mid-May of last year, in which Naomi Klein prospects a capitalistic Screen New Deal after the pandemic, that is, I quote, a living laboratory of a permanent and a highly profitable no-touch future for the privileged, she stresses, provided by a further screens proliferation. So a Screen New Deal after the pandemic. This is what I wanted to stress by taking out this expression from this article. Actually, the pandemic changed many things in our relationship with screens. One of the first writings to stress, to flag these pandemic effects was an article published on the New York Times at the end of last March, in which Nellie Bowles wrote as titled this article, coronavirus ended the screen time debate. Screens won. So, in the light of this situation created by the pandemic, during the first lockdown, that is to say last spring, someone said to my partner, "Oh, Mauro was right to deal with the screens." I stress that my book was published in France 4 years earlier with respect to this sentence. So this sentence, since I am a clever guy, made me understand that something had changed. Actually, we can compare the title of the New York Times of the end of March 2010 with another title of another article of the same author published on the same newspaper 1 year earlier, in which the same author recalled that once, that is to say previously with respect to 2019, screens used to be for the elite, while avoiding screens had later become a status symbol because, as she explained, human contact, I quote, is now a luxury good. It's a now meant referring to 2019. As you know, presently the human contact became a problem, a major problem. So this situation, this change, in my opinion, made some effects which remind me the classical definition of a phenomenological epoche. Usually, the definition of phenomenological epoche is relearning to see the world anew. What happened, in my opinion, in the light of the pandemic, is that we relearn to see ourselves watching through our screens anew. This is our peculiar kind of phenomenological epoche, a peculiar kind of epoche forcing us to put into brackets our usual unreflected attitude with respect to screens and to see ourselves watching to the screens anew and discovering some aspects of our relationship with the screens we ignored earlier. Actually, it is very interesting that in the first article of the New York Times I quoted earlier, we can find some meaningful statement by the Techno Repentant psychologist Sherry Turkle, previously a techno enthusiast psychologist of human technologies when she wrote the book life on the screen, identity in the age of the internet in 1995, and became later a techno repentant, who 10 years ago denounced our technologically alienated condition in Alone Together, and 5 years ago in Reclaiming Conversation, pleaded with us to have a chat instead of looking at our cell phones. Well, in the light of the perpetually lit screens in the coronavirus era, tackled in her statements within this article of the New York Times, Tarkle admitted that the concern over the time spent facing that light was a misplaced anxiety. You see, I put the verb reveals in red precisely to stress this idea of a sort of phenomenological epoche, allowing us to understand something we didn't realize before about our relationships with the screens. And the idea that we have been forced to understand something new. Now, Tarkle writes or states, forced to be alone, but wanting to be together, so many are discovering what the screen time should be. This idea of revelation, this idea of discover, is linked to, suggested me to speak about a sort of a phenomenological epoche in our relationship with the screens. But what did we discover actually? For instance, my older daughter sent me last spring this picture portraying an Aperol Skype she shared with her friends during the coronavirus lockdown. This is something very typical and, in my opinion, something significant, because thanks to the screen, we no longer just share snapshots of our meal before even tasting the food, but we ate it together. This is an example of what made Tarkle say that we were discovering what the screen time should be. And yet the possibility of spending our time that way was already available. But we realized that just thanks in the light of the pandemic crisis. So in other terms, the pandemic crisis made us massively discover, not necessarily for good, that the screens are not and never have been simple surfaces showing images, because they have always operated a certain historically, culturally, and technologically determined distribution of the visible and the invisible. They have from time to time established different kinds of relationship and therefore opened different kind of experiences, like the Skype or like our meeting. In short, the screens have never been mere surfaces, but the surfaces operating as interfaces, if this is what creating relations means. And here I'm making echo to this statement I took from Brandon Hookway's book titled precisely Interface, where he writes, the interface may be distinguished from the surface in that it does not primarily refer back to a thing or condition, but rather to a relation between things or conditions, or to a condition as it is produced by a relation. Still about screens as interfaces, we should specify also that with the electronic and later on digital revolution, screens have gradually become the main visual interfaces of devices, allowing us to communicate with others and with the world. In the meantime, such devices have been technologically developed in a multimodal sense, and I stress this aspect, by combining in multiple ways texts, images, sounds, and including looks, gestures, voices. In particular, with the electronic and later on the digital revolution, I quote here Kevin Kelly from his book titled The Inevitable, published in 2016, words have migrated from wood pulp to pixels on computers, phones, laptops, game consoles, televisions, billboards, and tablets. Letters are no longer fixed in black ink on paper, but flitter on a glass surface in a rainbow of colors as fast as our eyes can blink. Here we can trace another very important to me pandemic effect. That is to say, we are beginning, sorry, to realize the progressive hybridization of the visual and the verbal fostered by such screens. My reference here is Pietro Montani's book Emozioni dell'intelligenza, un percorso nel sensorio digitale, published in 2010, but also once again Kevin Kelly's book, a book in which he chooses 12 verbs characterizing in his opinion our digital future. One of these verbs is the verb to screen. So the verb screening. Screening meant, sorry, meant, according to Kelly, as a new activity which has new characteristics, including reading words, but also watching words and reading images. Kelly here is trying to stress a new form of visual perception. The digital era is elaborating, precisely based on the hybridization of the visual in optic sense and the verbal as another feature of the visual world. This idea that we are elaborating a new perception of words and images made me remind the seminal book titled De Sichtbare Mensch oder die Kultur des Films, published in 1924, The Visible Man or the Culture of Film by the Hungarian film theorist Bela Balázs, who reminded us how the invention of the printing with movable type allowed to seal the book and the concept in a culture that would make it possible for the West to dominate all other cultures for centuries. Yet, are we aware that the digital age is threatening both the components of the very culture, which for better or for worse has forged our collective identity? On the other hand, if the film age might indeed have sedimented the idea of an exclusive connection between images and the screens, then the increasingly massive migration of words on screens themselves ended up reminding us their relative autonomy, the relative autonomy of screens with respect to images. So much that to limit oneself to describe screens as mere surfaces for images would be restrictive and even misleading, as we wrote with Anna Caterina Dalmasso and Jacopo Bodini in the introduzione of I poteri degli schermi, a book on which the both of you, Vittorio, and Francesco Casetti publish your contribution. It suffices to think of the many ways in which screens allowed our communication during the COVID-19 pandemic to understand that screens showed this relative autonomy with respect to images. Let me show you a typical sad situation linked to the pandemic crisis in Italy. A COVID-19 safe hug room precisely based on one of the peculiar feature of screens, a peculiar feature which allowed us to remind the etymology of the word screen. And this is another pandemic effect, reminding the etymology of the word screen from Frankish skirmine, meaning to shelter, to protect. The French and Italian versions of the word screen and fencing have the same etymology, precisely referring to this common idea of protection. And on this basis, it follows another pandemic effect, the revealing of the exposing, protecting ambiguity as one and the same with the screen function, to put it in my own language, another feature of the Archi screen, no less than the showing, concealing ambiguity. So the screen's function is at the same time an ambiguity of exposing as a protection and the protecting, as well as an ambiguity of showing and concealing. It's another way of saying distributing the visible and the invisible, but also distributing exposition and protection. We can trace these two features in a passage of the very famous poem L'Infinito, the Infinite, by the Italian poet Giacomo Leopardi, in which he describes the site of a hedgerow, siepe, on a lonely hill. Let's read together a passage of the English translation of this poem. To me, this lonely hill was always precious, and this hedgerow also, were so wide a stretch of the extreme horizons out of sight. But sitting here and gazing, I find that the endless spaces beyond that hedge and the more than human silences and the deepest peace and quiet are fashioned in my thought, so much that almost my heart fill up with fear. So what we can find in this passage is that the hedgerow is an interface distributing the visible and the invisible, as well as founding the poet's relation with the latter, the invisible beyond the hedgerow, in a way that protects his heart from being completely filled up with the fear. So this is the importance of this key word in my view. Almost my heart fills up with fear. Why almost? Because there is the protection offered by the screen of the hedgerow. So we can trace here the visual element and the immunitarian element of the screen function. And in discovering, as Sherry Turtle would say, or relearning, as phenomenology would say, these elements, screens revealed more than before their relative autonomy with respect to images. And they urged us to step from a mere aesthetical, visible, invisible, to a larger anthropological approach to screens, precisely including the exposing and protecting ambiguity. Another pandemic effect I'd like to stress, the contactless screens. Let me recall you that Naomi Klein describes the Screen New Deal as a no-touch future. Well, during the digital revolution, screens have become tactile. Still, as we remarked earlier, the pandemic has precisely raised the issue of human contact, namely of touching. This is why we are now recovering experimentations held 6 years ago and concerning touchless touchscreens. The screen will figure out which part of it we wish to touch by detecting the heat and the sweat of our fingers. All we will need to do is to drive our hands close to the screen. No need to touch it. In 2015, no one thought this technology particularly useful. However, it took the coronavirus pandemic crisis about 30 years after the beginning of the internet spreading to realize in our collective experience what I indicated so far. Of course, there are pre-COVID-19 ways of thinking amid the ones I described so far that do not affect our collective experience only. Spurred in their development precisely by the digital revolution, certain screen studies have been focusing mainly on the screen's status of surfaces showing images, hence investigating them by means of archaeological and genealogical researches, both suggestive and erudite, but often not equally helpful in the understanding of what characterizes the current or upcoming screen experience and how they affect our way of being in the world. Those genealogies are mainly focused on the bond between the screen and the optical in connection with the emergence of spectacles like phantasmagoria in the early 19th century. Thus, such genealogies turn out being subordinated to an imagocentric perspective. This way, they neglect the fact that already in the 18th century, screens showed not only images, but also words. Thus, screens already provided a hybrid experience closer to the current one than it could be suspected. Let me show you the definition of écran in the dictionnaire François contenant les mots et les choses, plusieurs nouvelles remarques sur la langue française, published in 1694. You can see that the écran, the screen, is defined like that. What you hold in your hand and put in front of your face so as to protect it from a big fire. What you put in front of you to prevent the fire from hurting you. This kind of a screen is called a foot screen to distinguish it from the ones you hold in your hand. A beautiful screen, a pretty screen. Screens are usually decorated with paintings, poems, stories, tales, etc. Even certain visual culture studies were not able to actually grasp and point out the status of the visual interfaces feature on the multimodal relationship. This is important to me, devices that electronic and then digital screens were progressively highlighted. This way, they too often focused exclusively on a narrow consideration of visuality and of its mutation. On the one hand, such visual studies isolated this area of investigation from the complementary domain concerning the parallel mutations taking place in our relations with the language, both written and spoken, and fostering what Kelly calls a resurgence of words, which, according to him, has been caused by the digital revolution. On the other hand, starting from the restricted consideration of the screens as mere surfaces showing images, such visual studies moved in a purely imagocentric perspective, engaging in rather thoughtless leaps forward by predicting which visual device would supplant the screens themselves, and inevitably ending up finding it in the VR devices, isolating us from the visible world, as Lev Manovich or typically did already in 2000. Let me quote Manovich: with VR, the screen disappears altogether. VR typically uses a head-mounted display whose images, once again, the focus is on images, only on images, completely fill the viewer's visual field. No longer is the viewer looking forward at a rectangular flat surface located at a certain distance and which acts as a window into another space. Now she is fully situated within this other space. But after, in the light of the pandemic, even once we will hopefully have exited the COVID-19 emergency and entered a screen new deal, I think that the most widespread need could become to be connected, interactive, and protective. This is the reason why I wonder if a more effective response to this need, rather than the direction of the VR devices, as Manovich pretended, could come rather from certain wearable head-up displays, HUDs, making us open to the participatory and the multimodal horizons of the augmented reality, or even of the mixed reality. Sorry. And at the same time, keeping us in relation with the physical world, what the VR helmet do not allow us to be. In particular, MR, sorry, not MD, MR would allow us to experience 3D virtual images integrated in and interacting with the physical world. Let me give you a general definition of head-up displays. Head-up displays allows a user to view a scene while relevant information is overlaid on the scene, so that the user looking through the heads-up display simultaneously sees both the scene and the relevant information. This is a general definition taken from the Google Glass patent dated 2013, and this is an example of head-up display for cars. In this case, we have an head-up display on the window of the car, showing as the outside and the same time some informations. This is an head-up display for cars, I said, but Google Glass is an example of a wearable head-up display, including eye tracking, as its patent says. Let me recall that Google Glass is an augmented reality wearable head-up display whose production was interrupted in 2015, but a Glass Enterprise Edition 2 came out in May 2019, and it is available for direct purchase since February 2020. Why I precise all this information? Because when I speak about heads-up display, and I mention Google Glass, often someone objects me, but this was not succeeded technology. Let me recall you that we have to separate the technology and the use of that technology made by a certain mark. We are speaking about wearable technology, wearable head-up displays technology in general, in order to understand why, in my opinion, it would be a kind of technology more useful to us in the Screen New Deal rather than VR helmets. On the possible protection provided by wearable hats, I quoted this passage from a blog concerning another glass, not the Google Glass, but what the glass which is prepared by Apple. Let's read together this passage. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all learned that the more you touch things, the more you are at risk of getting it on your hands. And studies have shown, and the studies have shown, we all touch our faces without thinking a lot throughout the day. Apple Glass, still hope they don't call it that, will allow people to get information without touching anything. Plus, wearing glass is another layer of protection against airborne particles carrying COVID. Admittedly, it is minor protection, but it is something. There is a crucial point about wearable hats I'd like to stress, precisely concerning the question of the future of screens. Rather than supplanting the screens, wearable hats like Google Glass or Apple Glass temporarily use the retinas of their users as kinds of connected screens. So in a sense, screens do not disappear, but they are going to be incorporated in a peculiar sense. As Marta Neuhaus has appropriately made clear, even if Google Glass implies a prism lens named prism patterned screen, instead of welcoming the image on its surface, the crystal of the prism implements its refractive and hence deviating feature so as to redirect the projector's luminous beam toward our eye, and hence finding its screen directly on our retina. The screen of glass is thus not the prism, the screen is our eye. No wonder that this technology is called virtual retinal display. And it is precisely because our eyes is the screen that we can focus on the information transmitted by glass as if they were an integral part of reality. And I stress these last words because I will come back on this point later. Let's see together how actually virtual retinal display works. You can read this explanation. The user perceives a small translucent screen hovering at about arm's length, extended up and outward from the right eye. In other words, we don't have a physical screen anymore, but we will watch a virtual screen before our eyes, a arm's length before our eyes, which is the distance allowing us to see something, some information on that virtual screen, because the glass as such couldn't show us things in a way which could be seen by our eyes, because it would be too close to our eyes. So this is the reason of this technology of the virtual retinal display. Which is based, as I said, on the use of our retinas as the temporary use of our retinas as screens. And here I see an important direction of increasing use of our bodily organs as quasi prosthesis. In particular, our bodily organs as used temporarily used as screens. My posit is to qualify as quasi prosthesis the bodily organs that are involved in processes like the one I just described. Indeed, these characterizations aims at pointing out the peculiarly ambiguous status of these bodily organs. In fact, on the one hand, they are actually bodily organs, and in this sense, they are expected to keep an organic relation with the whole body, even during these processes. Yet, on the other hand, they are temporarily used as components of the connected digital apparatuses, aiming at strengthening our potentialities, first of all, our bodily skills. And let me show you another example of our eyes used as screens, the binocular eye tracking. You see, you have an infrared projection addressing infrared rays towards the eyes of this animal, and thanks to that you can see on the right screen, the screen on your right, the movement of its eyes. So once again, the retinas are used as screens of projection. Of course, there are other examples of our bodily organs used as quasi prosthesis. This is an example concerning skin, or maybe augmented skin with a smart temporary tattoo showing health issues. But I want to stress that the HUDs, the wearable HUDs displays are pushing towards an increasing digital hybridization of the visual and the verbal, and that this hybridization of the visual and the verbal is now and will increasingly become part of the real world, so to call it. Mm, Indeed, there is no univocal definition of the real that is a fit for all times and cultures. Humans belonging to a certain time and a certain culture tend to recognize themselves in a peculiar conception of what is real. Hence, on the occasion of major revolutions such as the digital one, humans are called to renegotiate what they agree to consider as real. So we find ourselves experiencing precisely a time of transition in which we shall elaborate our own definition of real. But at this time, the features of the digital revolution are such that to agree on a definition of real was never before as difficult, and never were the implication more dangerous. Let me recall you a passage of this film you maybe know, The Social Dilemma, which came out last year. This is Tristan Harris, former Google ethicist, stating if we don't agree on what is true, or that this is such a thing as truth, we are toast. This is the problem beneath our problem, because if we can't agree on what is true, then we can't navigate out of any of our problems. And the strong political polarization in the United States is just one of the examples which are evoked in this movie. So a philosophy screens, and even more radically, what I would call an a-philosophy screens, if by philosophy one wrongly means a merely conceptual form of knowledge, is now needed more than ever. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mauro, for your very interesting talk. And now I invite people to ask you questions, and you can do it by raising your hand or by writing in the chat, and you will be helped open mic to ask the question. Any question? So Mauro, I will start asking you this. You seem to see a more interesting future for forms of mixed or augmented reality, as you emphasize in your second part of your talk, rather than virtual reality, immersive environment. Am I right? And in spite, as you already said, the commercial failure of Google Glasses, do you think that even beyond the contingencies of the pandemic, with all the rules that, so to speak, benefit watching without touching, you see augmented reality as the screen of the future, more than virtual reality? And am I right in guessing so? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Augmented reality and mixed reality. That is to say, form of technological relationship to the world, letting us to be connected, to be interacting, to be protected, and to keep our relationship with the physical world. What is a problem with virtual reality? In my opinion, the focus, the exclusive focus on virtual reality as the future of visual technologies was linked precisely to an imagocentric idea, essentially linking screens and images. So the way of reasoning, in my opinion, was screens are linked to images. Now images are becoming world images. So images surrounding us without screens in some kind of virtual reality helmet. So tomorrow we will have the end of screens. And this way of thinking neglects that in digital revolutions allowed the migration, for instance, allowed the migration of words on screens. So in this sense, screens are showing that they are relatively autonomous from images. And they are mixing the verbal and the visual in a way which is changing and will increasingly change our relation with the world, keeping our relation with the physical world. Vittorio, your mic is closed.
Ah, yes, thank you. This is terrible. I wish we could be all around the table. Yes, please, Francesco.
Thank you, Mauro. It's a wonderful lecture full of topics, super interesting topics. And a couple of them will be at the center of my own lecture in a couple of weeks. There is 2 points, 2 issues that I want you to expand because it's super interesting. One is you insisted a lot on the difference between images and words. And I completely agree with you, even though I'm a imagocentric man, on the relevance of words. But why? Because if I go back, as you know, I'm passionate of archaeologists and genealogists. If I go back to the question of the archaeology of screen, and I read Kirchner book, precisely words and images are together implied in the screen, but they are implied in the activity of cryptography. So both, they are interesting not because they are two languages, but because they are two places of secret. This is the point, it seems to me very interesting. Screen deals with, you wrote a lot about that, with invisible. I would add, it deals with secret. And especially now in the pandemic, uh, what is the secret that is in our screen? What we are not knowing doing Zoom and the other kind of things? So this is my first question. Then there is another question, more technical, about incorporation and direct to retina, but maybe later. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much. Actually, you remember that you titled your wonderful meeting at Yale using the expression excessive screen. Are you hearing me? Yeah, okay. This
Yes,
idea,
I hear you.
This idea of excess, which I love to call rather this idea of exceeding, is absolutely fundamental about screens, and it's and I thank you very much for raising it. This is precisely what I wanted to stress when I spoke of this other quintessential feature of the screen function, which I called the exposing, protecting ambiguity. I think that the matter of secret has precisely to do with this ambiguity. Screens are, you know, we spoke about several times about this, my idea of developing an anthropology of screens. I think that, as I said, precisely this point of the exposition, protection, ambiguity of screens, which exceeds in some way the problem of the visible and the invisible. Allow us to go beyond a mere aesthetic consideration of screens toward an anthropological consideration of screen, and the problem of the secret, the problem of the sublime, the problem of the infinite is precisely at the core of this anthropological consideration of screens. I spoke about the sublime because I am thinking of the birth of tragedy by Nietzsche, who writes that we cannot approach directly the secret of the sublime. We still need the Apollinian veil in order to be protected in the same moment in which this veil allows us to expose toward with the secret of the sublime. It's the beginning of a reply.
Thank you. It's very clear. My lecture will be on the idea of protection, and what you say is basically, and I do not know if Richard Grusin is listening to us, is that the fear of mediation is something extremely important, and we have to consider that when we speak about this kind of questions. And
Absolutely.
I follow you, and I think we have been discussing for a long time, and not always being agreeing, but I think we are going in the same direction. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mauro.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro and Francesco. More questions? While our friends think about more questions to ask to Mauro, if you allow me, I would like to ask a second question, Mauro. This time dealing, I mean, there are many interesting aspects you touched about the relationship between words and images, but I'd like to ask you something about the relationship between the gaze and screens. What we are experiencing now is
sorry, Vittorio, the gaze and
the screens.
Okay.
Gaze and screens. Take what we are experiencing now. We are experiencing something, a social event, a group of people gathering, discussing timely topic through the mediation of the screen, where I'm looking at you and you on your screen are looking at me and at the other friends listening to us. So there is a virtual space, a digital virtual space that we all share, and that enable us to have this social exchange, this cultural, scientific, social exchange, which is also for many of us a meeting of friends. But the gaze dramatically differs from the gaze we would experiencing had this meeting be organized in a non-pandemic bodily traditional way. And the difference is that as I gaze at you, I simultaneously enjoy the potentiality to gaze at me while I'm talking to you. So it's a sort of narcissistic dimension that, well, I could exclude my camera and look just at you or at the other friends that participate to our webinar this afternoon. But most of the time we don't do it. Our webcam is on. So, and you can tell looking at people when they are looking at the screen, looking at you or looking at their own image. So what kind of experience is this from a phenomenological point of view, in your opinion? Do you think it's relevant, this different gaze that this technology automatically, at least potentially, brings along? Thank you.
Thank you, Vittorio. Thank you very much. I confess you that personally, to me, is not this experience is not so relevant. But this means nothing, of course. I think that culturally is a relevant experience, and we have to reflect upon it. And I thank you for soliciting me in this direction. I don't know if we could speak of such an experience as a narcissistic experience. For instance, I know that I have a friend of mine refusing to have a dinner through screens with me, precisely because he hates his own image on the screen while eating. So in any case, I think that there is for sure we can speak of an experience of visual reversibility in the terms defined by Merleau-Ponty, that is to say, a reversibility which is still imminent, but never realized in fact, because there isn't the fusion of the of me as seer and me as seen, because my gaze is addressed to you, not on my face. Or maybe this is the reason why it's not relevant personally to me, this kind of experience, because I am looking at you. And you know, there is a notion I stressed in the last part of philosophy screens, and on which I am working now, which I am deepening now, is the notion of dividuum. As you know, an individual is supposed to be an undivisible self. My idea is that the digital universe makes us experiences more and more individual situations. That is to say, situation in which our self is at the same time divided and multiplied. And I can put the experience we are reflecting upon in this context, like, as an example of dividuation of ourselves.
Thank you, Mauro, for your answer.
Thank you.
More questions?
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I would like to ask one. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mauro, for your beautiful presentation. You wrote a book some years ago, before Philosophy Screen, that was dedicated to the event of 9/11, in which it was central the relation, let's say, in between the spectator to that event, spectators that were very close to the event itself, that didn't distinguish that much from the event, but still were somehow protected by watching that event through their television screens. And you suggested that the fact that all these people watching together and insofar participating in this event, since the visual representation wasn't separated from the event itself, this watching together some images, some strong images, as those images were, could constitute the possibility of the constitution of a community, of a political way of recognizing ourselves. And then Richard Grusin was also participating in this seminar today, also reflected on this event, explaining how such an event was followed by the logic of premediation. And so my question, with such a long premise was, do you think that, let's put it this way, how do you think the screens and the fact that now we don't have a television screen as main screen of reference, but portable screens, how those screens played a role in this new event, which is clearly the, let's say, the new event after the 9/11, because I think that there are a lot of similarities, but also something happened in between the two that put the spectator more and more in the spectacle, more even that they were before. However close they could have been in 9/11, here they are mixed, they are intertwined, and somehow they are protected, also anesthetized by screens. But on the other hand, we are very exposed, and I would like, I don't know, I think that there is a strong connection in between the two, and these two events.
Sorry, Jacopo, I didn't grasp which is the new event you are referring to.
Sorry, the pandemic.
The pandemic, okay.
The pandemic itself, yeah, it's a very different kind of event, of course, and very different characteristics as well. But I think these two events are definitely showing us a constitutive relation with the screen and with the excessive nature of the screens itself. And I just wanted to know if you saw this link in between the two, and how you would tell.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege to have an ancient student of mine making me the more difficult question. Actually, it's a very difficult question you are asking me, Jacopo, and the answer, in a sense, is linked with what I replied to Francesco, because actually when I wrote about September 9/11 images, I recalled that everybody, in a way or another, evoked the notion of sublime. I can give you a larger reply, not a reply precisely focused on the parallel you asked me about. My larger reply is that 9/11 has been maybe the last event of a certain relationship, a certain shared consideration of the real, of what the real was. And this enabled us to feel dead together, as I wrote in the book. Now we lost that shared consideration of the real. We still had 20 years ago, and our problem is that we don't have a shared consideration of the real yet. This puts our relationship with screens in a different context. So in this sense, we cannot precisely develop a comparison between an event and the other event. Precisely because of the fact that we don't have a shared idea of real. The problem of negationism is enrooted in this main problem. Thank you, Jacopo.
Thank you. I think it's the point. I really agree with you.
Other questions?
There is one question in the comment. I've just read them.
Sorry, yeah. It really requires multitasking. Okay. I have a question for you, but my connection here in the countryside is awful, so I would kindly ask Vittorio to read it to you. I would like you to expand on this relationship between aesthetical and anthropological dimension. In particular, I would like to ask you whether the passage to a more general anthropological dimension isn't already included in the complexity of the term exposition. I mean that we have the tendency to imagine exposition as a visual concept, whereas the etymology of the term itself is a very complex one. We are exposed to the atmospherical elements, to danger, and so on. In this sense, a very important question is the one about the subject of exposition. What is exposed in the screen relation? Is the content of the screen exposed to us, or are we exposed to it? It's quite interesting.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
Graziano Lingua asked the question.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Graziano.
Mauro was me, but my connection, you know, in this moment is very terrible, and don't. I prefer to.
Okay.
Right. Don't worry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. In any case, you know, Graziano, it's another very tricky question. Maybe I can just stress that you quote yourself the term subject within quotation marks, because it's very difficult to qualify what you call the subject of exposition. This is the reason why you put this word subject into a quotation mark, because in a sense my immediate reply would be, if you in the following phrase you ask what is exposed in the screen relation, you are speaking from a grammatical point of view of something like an object rather than something like a subject. And this is precisely the point. In my opinion, we cannot really reply in a sense rather than in the other one. Here, the Merleau-Pontian scholar who lives in me come outside. It's an indecipherable ambiguity, which is the very ambiguity of exposition and protection.
Sorry, please, Luis 40, could you turn off your mic? Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you, Graziano.
I don't see other question in the chat. So if there are no question at the moment, I will, in an authoritarian way, exploit my condition of being the administrator of the session by asking you a further question. Here we are dealing with something really multi-layered, as you also discuss in your interesting talk, when it comes to screen, because we have a medium, we have a device, which nevertheless brings along content. So if it is now, it has been debated since many years, it is clear that not only we gaze at images, but images also gaze at us. They exert a power, an iconic act. They want something from us. Just to quote some way of relating to this topic, the subjective quality of the other pole of this chiasmatic relation between us and the screen. Okay. Is there something new to be thought of, to be discussed, when we factor in that these images is an image that comes to me, that gazes at me through a screen, with respect to a billboard on the street, a painting hanging on a wall, a film I am watching while sitting, alas, hopefully soon, in a movie theater. Is there anything different in this iconic respect that the digital screen brings along, or not? Or is it irrelevant for you? Thank you.
Thank you, Vittorio. Um, on the one hand, I would say that Mitchell is right when he writes in his famous essay you quoted that the images are quasi agents wanting to reduce us as a sort of quasi object with respect to their quasi subjectivity. In this sense, I would say that there is not an ontological difference from these dialectics, images, spectators, in the case of digital or electronic screens with respect to cinematic screens or other form of screens. And I think that we are for some aspects we are still in this ancestral fear of images as pre-modern, as Mitchell writes in that essay. He writes of a pre-modern attitude we have with respect to images. And this pre-modern attitude would consist in an ancestral fear of images, probably the fear of being reducted precisely in the condition of quasi-object. In a sense, we are still in that condition, and I think that this is one of the components of which are at work in our problem of renegotiating our consideration of the real in an epoch in which we are surrounded by screens.
Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you all.
Any more questions from the audience?
Vittorio,
Yes.
Hi,
Hi, Richard.
Richard.
How are you, Mauro? How are you?
Hi, great to see you.
Yes, and you as well, both of you, and Springsteen as well. Uh,
And Bernie.
exactly. Well, Bernie, you can't miss. So I have an ill-formed question, Mauro. Um, it, in a way, grows out of the remark you made about your friend who doesn't want to have dinner on Zoom because he doesn't like watching himself eat. And what that made me begin to think about was the way in which this pandemic mediation that we're living in now may be working along with the virus itself to break down the kinds of dualism between self and other or self and world that I'm been committed to breaking down for a long time, or that's troubled me. Because what's interesting about this pandemic mediation is now I'm looking at my screen and I'm seeing both the way my Zoom is set up, I'm seeing Vittorio, um, and I'm seeing myself. And so it seems as if, in one respect, the screen is a mirror, but it is a mirror in one way, but mirrors also hold on to a kind of duality between the self and the other and the self and the real. And so I'm not sure I like the mirror part, but what I do like is the idea that I appear on screen even as I'm speaking in the same way that others appear on screen. And so the difference between the self and the other becomes, I think, troubled. And part of how this happens is obviously through this form of mediation. But what I've been trying fitfully to think about, and what I'll try to say a little bit more about when I give my talk, is the way in which the virus itself breaks down this distinction, this clean distinction or dualism between self and nature, self and the world. Because the virus now, which is on the one hand other, alien, also only exists when it is inside of us and part of ourselves. And so I guess what I'm speculating about here is, well, first of all, I guess what I'm concerned with is whether we should be spending our time still thinking about what the real is, because the pandemic and the virus is damn real. I don't think we've got a lot, there's not a lot to debate. 400,000 people plus in the US have died. Not to say there aren't idiots who think it's not real, but there are always idiots who think a lot of things. And so I'm curious about that. And then, Vittorio, in terms of your own work, I'm curious to know whether or how mirror neurons might work differently if, rather than, let's say, watching somebody else eat an ice cream cone, I'm watching myself eat an ice cream cone, and whether this new phenomenon, which of course could happen just watching in a mirror, but it just made me wonder about that, because my questions about your talk 2 weeks ago also were about trying to push what I saw as the kind of dualism in your ontological framework as well. And that's just kind of what I'm interested in complicating or pushing against. So.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
read the answer to Mauro, and then I reply after about the last part of your question concerning brain neurons and stuff like that.
Yes, Richard, thank you so much. I tried all the time to avoid any kind of dualism in my talk and maybe my life. Today, by mainly by using the term quasi. I spoke of a certain use of our bodies, of our bodily organs as a quasi-prosthesis. That is to say, something which on the one hand is me, because is an organ of my own body, but at the same time is used as an added component of a digital device which cannot work without that added component which I am. And so I become the set, the scene, if you want, of a non-human technological agency. This is the situation in which we are, and in which we will increasingly be. So, of course, any kind of dualism, of remaining dualism, I would say, is absolutely exposed. And this is the problem of the problem of our epoch, both in our way of living and in our way of thinking. I think that the problem of the real in this sense is precisely for this reason particularly tricky to approach today. Because in a dualistic epoch, the negotiation about what we could consider as real would be easier, precisely because any kind of a dualism are broken. We cannot share any consideration of which what real in the trivial sense, of course, of the meaning is. I was rereading yesterday while preparing this talk, a page of Proust. And the Proust, the Time Regained, the last volume of the Search of Lost Time. And Proust writes, what is real? But what is reality? And he writes, I don't mean the trivial thing according to which we could say bad weather, lightning restaurant, and so on. This is something obvious, he writes. I say real as reality as the poet can express by the traffic of metaphor. And I said myself, what the trivial sense of real, which for Proust was something self-evident, is not evident anymore for us. And this is a real problem, as I said, the problem of negationism, of many kinds of negationism, the problem of political polarizations and so on, have their roots precisely in the fact that we don't have a trivial shared consideration of what is reality. For instance, half of the mankind think that the physical world is real, the digital world is not real, is something different from reality. Half of the world trust everything on the screens. This is a major problem politically and ontologically for us, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to thank.
Okay, so trying to answer your question about what's going on in the brain body when all these changes of perspective becomes available. We don't know much yet. From the little we know, I think I could say the following. Our brain, from the very beginning, somehow builds our sense of reality. From the obvious experience that in spite of our continuous blinking, we don't see gaps in our visual experience of the world. The filling in is clearly the outcome of a biological editing going on between the brain, the body, and the world, so to speak, outside. So we are congenitally equipped with a device, a biological device that enable us to inhabit parallel worlds. What is pretty new to me is the pervasiveness of this parallel world and the importance that it gains day by day, and the pandemic probably was a major global boost in that direction, but nevertheless was already present before. As I was saying at the end of my talk 2 weeks ago, I'm pretty sure that these topics were debated in the Paleolithic, and someone would have questioned where will we end up when we won't be able anymore to distinguish a real bison from its bidimensional, although very kinetic representation on the cave of some cavern. The point is that once you're out of the cavern, you're fully immersed in a very poignant, potentially harmful, that requires all of your attention physical world. Now it's the opposite. I mean, we, in this particular time, but things won't be the same as we hopefully someday will we throw away our facial mask because useless. Until that day, we better use them. But so this is no problem for our brain at all. To which extent this will be able to reestablish our normative approach to the world and all the relevant issues that follows from our ontological normativity, nobody knows. But if I could add, if there is one hot topic to be thoroughly investigated from a variety of perspectives, this is the one. One thing that Zoom doesn't change is that when we are engaged in interesting conversation, time flies. So it's 2 hours we are on, and it's time, unfortunately, for us to say goodbye. First of all, let me thank Mauro Carbone for his extremely stimulating talk, and for all the people who participated and will participate in the version that we'll upload in our YouTube channel. A particular thanks to the people who animated the discussion. We are looking forward to your talks. Once again, thank you all, and I say goodbye in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.